Welcome everyone to FMDiSC for the last time in 2021. We have a good meeting, so we're just going to start. Beatrice Beaubien is here, talk about project management. So take it away, Biddy.
All right, sorry, just have to acknowledge this. Okay, does that look good?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, so I think, and you would probably agree, a developer can sense that there are processes that make their lives easier. If you put simple planning steps in place and update them regularly, this is not hard work. And I'm sorry I'm reading this, but yeah, whatever. I'll sketch out some straightforward strategies to lighten the load and to bring you some peace of mind. The subjects are going to include planning for the speed bumps, negotiating scope changes, and building a fruitful communication framework and building relationships. And most important, ensuring satisfaction with the final product. So I am a biochemist. I paid my dues as a biochemist in the biotech industry. And before that, I was an assistant prof at the University of Ottawa. My biotech days trained me in project management, and I've worked in that framework ever since. After my science career, I started in FileMaker 24 years ago, in large part with the help of people like Bev and other people at the Friday Night Chat. My first project was a large clinical trial management solution for a cancer multi-center trial. Since then, I've produced solutions in a variety of different workplaces. I'm currently the project manager for FileMaker at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, and I've been there for the past 16 years, and I have my own private clients as well. I am deeply committed to understanding different foodways across the world. And I love recreating some of the amazing food out there, be it Mexican, European, Asian, Eastern European, Republic of Georgia. Georgian food is now one of the things that I'm enjoying. And I've also done a stint recreating Ethiopian dishes, which are amazing. And I really like puttering around my garden. So this is my garden in the late summer. And it doesn't reflect all the almost literal tons of stuff I have been transporting around the garden, but it's going to look a lot different next year. And this shows what it looked like about 3 weeks ago when we had our first snowfall. I'm going to be in this session, I'm going to be reinforcing what you already know, but I think it's important to reinforce the understanding that you've gleaned. Collectively in this group, there are many hundreds of years of experience, and as you regularly share through the FMDiSC meetings and other groups, there is a wealth of knowledge already here in this meeting. From my perspective, this project management approach that I'm going to share with you is a response to a work philosophy I have that what hinders my task is my task. And it follows on from the training I've done in human-computer interface design. And these efforts were pursued to gain a greater understanding of how I can deliver the best possible service and product. There may be some processes that are new to you. Back when I was focusing on coding and designing, I thought paying attention to processes was time that I could barely afford, but I was wrong. Laying a good foundation of stakeholder engagement, of communication, risk, change, and team management was the best time investment I could make. So the material we're going to cover reflects the years of project management training I've undergone to get my PMP certification. And all these insights have been grounded in putting them into practice through subsequent years. The particular tools I'm focusing on are a selection of about half a dozen, and these are what I found to be the low-hanging fruit of easy gains. So we're going to cruise through the landscape of FileMaker development with notes on how to make the development journey work for everyone. We're going to describe how to develop the itinerary to get from here to there, including figuring out where there is, which is a biggie. How to negotiate speed bumps, which here's a hint, do not accelerate over speed bumps. And how to deal with tough bends and turns, ditto. We're going to move on to how to know when you finally arrived at the end, and coping with the "are we there yet" comments from the peanut gallery, and how to keep all the passengers happy from beginning to end. Snacks are good, but effective communication is even better. So starting with development, before you start, you plan. You bring all the justifications for doing the work together. You may need these explicit details later in the work. For example, if you get pushback on resource allocation. And this planning builds on the business case and may include, or it builds up the business case, and it may include a range of business pressures. And many examples are, and I'm sure that you have many other examples, but one of the reasons for the business case that should go into the business case is that the business is expanding, the old technology can't keep up, or the organization has become aware of new ways of thinking about how to leverage mobile or cloud. Very commonly, new governance in a business wants to pivot to a more effective way of working. And it's a biggie for me. The regulatory requirements mean workflows or reporting have to be rethought. If these cases or these justifications are articulated early and clearly, it smooths the way for later discussions about why particular resources need to be expended and in what time frame. Also, at this point, it's inappropriate to dive deep into total cost of ownership or return on investment, but it certainly helps to begin thinking about how to phrase this before you get the sponsors to sign off on expenditure. So this process helps focus the scope. If everyone understands the why of doing it, it makes it easier to set aside new ideas over the course of the project and set them aside for a phase 2 and articulate that it's outside the scope of the present work. Once the reason for the project is established, the process of getting the sponsors to sign off on it is done with the following. So if the project is minor or a continuation of prior work, you can have an extensive memo of understanding, and that might be sufficient. If it's not of this scale, a project charter is written that lays out the business case, the roles of the team members, the risks, and I'll go into that a little bit more later, and the objectives with the timelines. And the objectives should have a sign-off procedure for every single one. So the objectives need to be signed off by one person. One person has the responsibility to sign off. If you have 2, you'll get passing the buck. You don't want that, hence just 1. And finally, the sponsors, generally those paying the bills, sign this charter as an acknowledgement that their staff will be needed to make the project work, the timing of any interim payments, and their other responsibilities, which may involve liaising with and coordinating with other departments in the organization. The charter also serves to nail the developers' colors to the mast about what they will do and when they will do it. And in many ways, this initial documentation is the most important in the project. because it constrains scope, and it frees the developer from fielding questions about why features can't be added mid-project, and we'll talk about changes a little bit later. It can feel onerous putting the project charter together. Actually, I've never developed a project charter that didn't at some point feel onerous, but it can save the project from bloat, and it's absolutely necessary for projects that involve a lot of staff. Once the project is approved to go forward, it's time to sit down with the consolidated teams, so internal and external, to write a brief team charter. This lays the foundation of the shared responsibility of each member of the team and includes a code of conduct and the expected behaviors. And you only have to have been on teams with a level of dysfunction to understand how this can help. It also frees team members who understand if they discover mid-project that they can't continue for whatever reason, and the charter is proving to be onerous midstream, they have a graceful way of leaving. So here are some thoughts about the low-hanging fruit, the documentation that will help without a full-blown project management framework in place. So all of this documentation should be available to everyone in your organization, but particularly all those working on the project. And whereas there are some types of documentation that probably are not appropriate to do in FileMaker, this is perfectly suitable to just a bare bones. So the stakeholders, for example, can lie in one table. And the nice thing about that is that as you decide that you need more fields, you can simply do that on the fly. So while you have been prepping the memo of understanding or the project charter, all the stakeholders are tracked that you've had to consult. And the bits of information to include would be, and this would be all the stakeholders, not simply the ones that were involved in developing the charter or the business case. The type of information you want to capture here goes from the very specific to the somewhat extraneous, but might really come in handy at some point. So bits of information, what their role is, what their level of engagement is. And this may change over the course of the project, but level of engagement. So are they disengaged? Are they unconcerned, but they need to be in the loop? Are they totally engaged, somewhat excessively so? So this is a way to track what the perception of the stakeholders are. The other thing that I find really critically important, and this comes under stakeholder engagement and communication, is what is their preferred way of communicating? I have my strong preferences, and I know others do too. And I like being able to record that and note it so that I don't rub people the wrong way about texting them when they absolutely insist on emailing. And basically every aspect of their contact details about how to reach them. And then you can throw in anything that seems even vaguely relevant, where they take their holidays, what they like and what they don't like about virtually anything, their preferred takeout, when they get twitchy in meetings, whatever. And obviously this table is only shared internally with your team. And risks. For some reason, I really love risk management. After a couple of initial meetings with the client, I can see the red flags pretty clearly. The list of risks go into the project charter with the strategies to either mitigate, avoid, or accept. Another formal classification for risks is transfer. And what transfer means is that if you feel that this summer may be a disastrous summer in California, you can consider buying insurance, and that's transferring the risk. The more clearly the client understands the possible speed bumps and risks at the outset, the easier it is to deal with them when they occur. And I'd also note there are blanket ones that probably should go in every charter, and that is loss of network access and or disaster recovery. So the risk documentation will go some way to contain and hopefully avoid surprises or misunderstandings. And there's a reason for this. If you hit an unanticipated risk and it involves an increase in expenditure, at least you have documented that you thought that that might be on the cards. And obviously any increase in expenditure needs to be approved by the sponsor. I'm going to move on to what I think is really fundamental. I think, Jason, you've probably seen some of these slides before, but quality management to me is incredibly important. And building for quality is can be complex. It always begins with the business logic. You can't build a quality product by fitting in the logic after the fact. The other aspect to consider is how are you going to measure quality? Because you do need a metric. You do need a way to say, we have built this in a way that ensures the satisfaction of the users, and that the users have the ear of the sponsor so that it percolates upwards, so that that overall satisfaction, hopefully happiness. Of course, we're always aiming for delight, but sometimes we don't always get there. But you have to plan in advance for it. The way that I deal with this is through prototypes, because I find prototypes are a fantastic communication tool. And I like the concept of starting with prototypes from the very, very beginning. And prototyping merges with user testing. The other thing I feel really strongly about is if you invest too much in the prototype, you will become attached to it. And I think maybe I'm not the only one who's done this, but you develop what you are euphemistically calling a prototype, and you develop it in FileMaker, and all of a sudden you become extremely attached to it. And then the user says, this isn't anything like what I need. The other disastrous thing that can happen is that the user becomes very attached to the FileMaker prototype, and when you actually try and introduce the production version, they go, no, I like the prototype better. So that's why you disassociate the prototyping technology from the solution that is actually going to go into production. So you also want to free yourself to make as many mistakes as possible when you're doing the prototyping. And that's why really starting with pen and paper permits you to see immediately where you're going down the wrong path. Once you feel that you're in the right path, that you have a grasp on what the workflow is that would actually work with a backend, you can move on to, again, not in FileMaker, really primitive. So this is super primitive, semi-interactive balsamic mockup. It is the most primitive way of delivering a wireframe in balsamic mockups. And it's beginning to message a little bit too much like a real solution. But since you're sending it as an interactive PDF, the user who's doing the user testing hopefully will not mistake this for anything like what they will finally have to use. All you're doing here is trying to identify what the workflow should be, not what it should look like. Well, how it should function without any bells and whistles. So maximum amount of time the prototype should take is only a couple of hours, because you have to be willing to walk away from it. They're supposed to be disposable. And the prototypes are then the way that the developer develops the user testing questions. So not simply does this work, but does it work by whatever. when you say you need this, is this the type of way that you would get through that workflow? So very specific questions, but open, because you don't want to lead the user in the testing to say, oh yes, thank you for asking. I did actually love that drop down. You don't want to lead the user to say there's a particular element of this that I particularly like. And in fact, you're looking for the negatives. You want to find out why this may not work. That final user checklist, that acceptance off the prototypes, will feed back to the acceptance criteria of the objectives. So you need to keep this in hand and say, this is what we determined it was going to work like. And when the user is presented with the development about to go into production and ask for final acceptance, if they come up with objections saying it doesn't have this functionality, it's important to be able to go back and say, we never identified that type of functionality. That wasn't on the radar, and that's not what we were aiming for. Again, we're aiming for a minimum of surprises. So that's prototyping, and that's the foundation of quality management, which is one of the major tranches in formal project management. I'm going to move on to communication and stakeholder engagement, because I also think these are important, which is why I'm including them in the session. So here's a tip. Never hold a meeting without a purpose. And if there's a purpose, there's an agenda. And subsequent to the meeting, don't let 48 hours go by without the minutes being drawn up and listing the action items. As you can probably tell, I feel strongly about this. Action items must include the one person responsible and when they will send confirmation that they have finished that action item. And the minutes are sent out to all stakeholders, whether or not they were at the meeting. And all the action items are tracked to make sure that they're fulfilled. One of the problems with meetings is that people think that they know what happened in them. And a lot of misunderstanding can occur because the idea of what happened at the meeting may diverge, and that can be a source of problems. So minutes are useful because it hopefully gets people on the same page. If they were checking their mail during the meeting, it lets them know what went on when they weren't focusing. And if decisions were made that people in retrospect have second thoughts about, it gives them an opportunity to say, can we circle back to that, because I don't think that's going to work. So again, mitigation of risk and engagement of stakeholders and keeping everybody on the same page. And I'm just, while we're talking about communication and documentation, progress reports, they're essential, but I keep them regular, but I also keep them as brief as humanly possible and only as frequent as the project requires, because I make a commitment at the outset to the team members that I will not fill their inbox with anything extraneous. And I'm going to talk about project momentum at the end of the session, but momentum is helped by limiting communication to what's necessary. Blasting out too much actually does slow a project's momentum. And so basically limiting communication to what's necessary. And you have to, it's a trade-off with, it's best to operate on the assumption that not everybody who needs to know and needs to be current is actually current, because you can't force people to read emails. But you can keep the email short, and you can emphasize that some are more important than others. So coming back to that sharing is caring thing, it's really important to spend quality time with the key players. and not just the key players, and I'll follow up on that. It's really important to get their feedback. It's really important to keep the dialogues open and as warm as appropriate. As culturally, some people may find warm really creepy, so respectful would be a good alternative. I found it really helps to demonstrate consistently that every single email, every contact, and every interaction is welcome. And I respond immediately, even if it's only to confirm that I received it and when to expect a more fulsome reply. I don't want anyone holding back because they have reservations as to whether what they have to say is wanted. So above my signature, it's always, thanks for your help, or beginning off an email, it's always thanks very much for your email. And I make sure that I thank particularly the more reticent ones, no matter where in the hierarchy they are, whenever they raise their head above the parapet to offer something. Because in very hierarchical client structures, the needs of those lower down may consistently be dismissed, but they can supply the edge cases that can make or break a project success. And now we're turning to something that, if you have encountered this in working with enterprise, you may hate it. And in one of my DevCon presentations, I presented the rationale for why this is something that we have to adjust to, and I certainly have had to adjust to it. But from a project point of view, there will be probably unavoidable changes that have to be made to the work in progress. So dealing with that up front before the work begins, it is, I would say, beyond helpful. It's necessary to develop a detailed plan to accomplish dealing with it, which begins with documenting who said that they required it, determining whether they've established the changes required to meet the stated project objectives, and if not, how do they justify it? Then after that, subsequent to that, if they can justify it, how will it impact the people, resources, the technology, the timelines, and the budget? And will the sponsors approve it, given all this information? And if the sponsors agree, then it gets filed with the memo of understanding of the charter as part of the project. And informal project management, this means basically adjusting everything, adjusting the timelines, adjusting the budget, adjusting the risks, and adding a scope change will always, in my experience, increase risk. So the risk management has to be changed as scope changes. Now, the reason for this formality is, number one, to make it non-trivial to change the direction of the boat in midstream, because it takes work to re-navigate the deliverables. And number two, if Bobby the boat builder wants a shiny new feature in the middle of a project, she needs to acknowledge how it's going to possibly delay or make more expensive the work, or both. And I'm going to move on to tool number 3, which is team management. And many of you are so experienced in this that I'm going to keep it really short, and I'm only going to affirm what you already know. Good team dynamics are really important. Conversely, conflict is not a bad thing, but conflict needs to be managed, and if possible, capitalized on if it's going to benefit the project. Differences between talented individuals are unavoidable. Just look at Corn Walker and Martha Zink's very public disagreement about Cheetos. Not that I get that, but it's a fun thing to watch. But the more plurality of viewpoints you have within a team, the stronger the team is. And I could devote a whole session to leadership, which I actually did in one of my DEFCON sessions. But leadership is negotiating team differences. And the more talented people you have, the more you may find that you have to deal with that. So yeah, I want to just comment on some. Resolving conflict isn't always the aim, and sometimes it's sufficient to get it into the open and understand the basis for it. But I do believe that it really does need to be acknowledged. And for the health of the team's interactions and the project's success. So following up on the opening car trip analogy, these planning activities have serious repercussions if they're neglected. And unlike a car trip, it would mean more than a possible replacement of the suspension system. What is at stake is a lack of trust. What's at stake is the project momentum and possibly an abandoned project. One thing in common with the car trip, though, is the concept of momentum in a project. Keeping up a project's momentum isn't just good for the bottom line, it keeps everyone involved and committed. Keeping everyone involved and committed and the momentum up is gold in a project. There's absolutely no substitute for it. So closing out a project. Project is closed when the final deliverables have been accepted. And the client has signed off that this is the case. So the sponsor has to say, yeah, we've received everything. This is what we thought we were getting and we have received it. In addition to that, all the financials are settled, including all the services and the materials that may have been used during the project are paid for and those accounts settled. Closing the project can feel like an afterthought, but it's really important to do it as quickly as possible. And one of the reasons for that is you will have team members that are about to go into something else, or you will have a team member that has been postponing their vacation for 6 months, and you need to sign off, and the project needs to be concluded quickly, simply so that you can release everybody from the team. I'm gonna touch on project management technology. If you have a smallish group, and I'm not going to define what smallish is, but the task of purchasing Microsoft project and getting everybody on board and trying to insist that everybody look at it frequently and trying to keep it updated may simply not be worth it. I like Microsoft Project because I love Gantt charts and I love seeing the predecessor, successor Gantt charts, and I love seeing how everything changes as soon as things are speeding up or slowing down. But to use the tools that I just described, all you need is a way of tracking, and preferably a way of tracking that everybody can see at a glance. Whether or not they spend the time to look at it is another subject, but at least they know, hopefully, where to go to see it and to understand. And that, for example, applies to if a stakeholder role changes slightly, everybody can see immediately that this person is no longer the department head, they are now the VP, and that may change a lot. So yeah, for Betty purposes, you can create a FileMaker file. FileMaker is a great tool for doing this, to track content management for change requests, the table for the stakeholders, and that may suffice for you. If you're really into project management, I suggest you read up and then you buy Microsoft Project, but then you have to buy licenses for your entire team, and that's another issue. So Oh yeah, I should also say, you're probably, if you have a team, definitely a sizable team, you're probably using bug tracking software. So there's an example of how it's better to go outside FileMaker for certain functionality. It just makes life a lot easier. So project management tools and practices help avoid some of the pitfalls that all of us experience from time to time. And the more experienced we are, the more interesting ways we find to encounter the rakehead interaction. If you find unanticipated events and unintended directions or dragging your projects off course from time to time, it's time to revisit how you deal with the processes within your project. And finally, thank you so much. It's a real privilege to be invited to speak, and very nice to see my friends. So thank you.
Thank you, Betty, so much for being here. That was tremendous for a lot of us, because all experience comes from failure. And I'm sure if you share some of the less than optimum results that led you into some of these conclusions and thoughts.
Thanks very much, Lynn. I'm ready to field questions.
Yes, please unmute yourself if you'd like to ask Betty a question about something in specific. I want to know, when you present some of this stuff, you get a lot of pushback from stakeholders and end users sometimes. I mean, I had one project fail because they were really invested in a paper moving process. You know, file folders would go from desk to desk, and that was their work process. And they did not want to give that up. And even though talking to management and everything, I wasn't able to put that over. So I'm wondering, how do you get that buy-in when it's reluctant?
So first off, I would say, if they cannot build an internal business case for doing a piece of work, I'm assuming that you were working with these in one context and it morphed into, let's deal with the paper. Because if a company brings a developer on board to say, let's deal with the paper, and you come back and go, we're going to deal with the paper, and they go, oh no, actually, perhaps we don't want to do that because it would be too disruptive, then it's valid to go back and say, well, why are we sitting in this meeting then? Because that's what we're here to talk about. Does that sound harsh?
No, in that specific case, it was, they were losing orders and misplacing things because of the paper process. And when I pointed that out, they didn't know that that's what they were doing, that they needed an order to be at different places at the same time, but it couldn't be because there was a single file, right?
Yeah.
And I pointed out these process gaps to them, and they still were not willing to change their process that much. So
you can't drag gophers to water and get them.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. So yeah.
Do you think that points out a kind of a something that's endemic to the process, which is that like you might make an initial sale to the owner of the company to engage you for your services, but I think you have to do a sales pitch constantly throughout the project to everyone, all the stakeholders. You know, new stakeholders sometimes come in the middle of the process. Sometimes there are people who are like the ones that, and thanks for bringing it up, by the way, you know, the low level workers who sometimes have very important piece to contribute. You know, you have to get those people's buy-in too, because in my experience, it only takes one person to just sink a project. You know, if they're loud enough about it, about what they don't like or whatever, they can really put a lot of drag on the project. Have you experienced that, Betty?
Yeah, I had a project fail in pharmacy because they just were not being paid attention to. In fact, they were being spoken over. They were being talked over. Yeah.
Beatrice, I have some questions about, do you work with your clients to implement any sort of earned value management techniques during the course of the project to sort of estimate, how bad it's going to be when you run over budget or exceed the time limits?
It depends on the scope of the project. I mean, if those are part of the tools that this part of the pardon the term, it's the armamentarium of project management, of being able to do those types of calculations. But they're only relevant when the scope is extremely large.
So
or I guess another way of saying it is if the sum is obviously from at first blush something that's going to impact a large proportion of the bottom line of a company, then it's something that needs to be looked at. So I mean, if the turnover, if the profit of a company was $20,000 a year and this is going to impact 10,000, it really doesn't matter that the scope is small. It's obviously going to have a big impact. But generally people think about it in terms of projects that are hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, I was just curious if you had any tools you preferred, because it's been my experience having worked with architects and everything that they typically, estimate how much it's going to cost to do a particular phase of the work. And then they start doing the work and they don't know whether they're ahead or behind schedule or under over budget until they get to the end of that phase of the work.
Oh, so a Microsoft project will do that.
Yeah, typically they won't use it. They find it too.
No, but you, yeah. So what you're actually talking about is if you have 5 tasks going on at the same time, each of them are using resources at a slightly different rate. And there are ways to approach that. There are ways of looking at these are the tasks. This is the percent completion of each of the tasks. This is how much it's estimated to cost. And yeah, so it's not onerous, but you have to, be entering in all that data to be able to,
right. I have had some success having them use a work breakdown structure and basically checking off all the items that are complete and what their value is dollar-wise, and then do a quick estimate of like, hey, we're behind schedule or we're over budget. But for whatever reason, they love Gantt charts. They just find it onerous to try and fuss with them. Maybe it's just Microsoft project, I don't know.
Yeah. This is the type of situation where the project manager, whoever is doing the project management, has got to be charging for their time in tracking this, because it's non-trivial. So this is a formal paid role of a project manager to be able to track as costs are accruing and how the budget is being drained.
Yeah, it's been my experience that they typically don't budget any time in their proposals to their clients for specifically project management.
Yeah, so you're basically talking about earned value, and it's just, it's something that project managers are supposed to track.
Thank you.
Back in the day when documentation was a big thing, I used to know that for whatever estimate of time I put in the construction and design and everything, I would have to budget about 25% more for documentation. What percent do you think project management should be budgeted for?
It depends on the scale of what you're doing. So I'm the developer and the project manager for the projects that I do. So generally people say 10%, but as we were just mentioning, if if the client all of a sudden really seems to need a huge amount more time and analysis done, I think it's perfectly acceptable to charge more.
Okay, I guess it also depends on how many people you're managing and how many, if you're doing
Oh, for sure.
subcontractors and stuff. So good, that's a good estimate. Does anyone else have a question? Remember to unmute yourself if you need to. Okay, then. I want to thank you so much. That was so wonderful to observe. So, and it's our honor to have you too, Betty. Not just, it's a big group and we're worldwide, and you're world class. So that's just
as I said, I so much appreciated the invitation. It was lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now I'm on your mailing list.
Yes, you are. So we'll make sure
that makes me happy. Yeah.
Great. Okay. I guess we can move on then. Things I didn't get to say at the beginning because that's me. We're going to, Dina, do you want to make your announcement now?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everybody. I am a new lead of the in the group Women Innovating Together with FM, formerly Women of FileMaker. Oh, thanks. And it's not related to my new position, but we are at the end of the year, the calendar year. And so we wanted to make a little push for end of year donations. WIT FM is a tax deductible, it is a 501c3 organization. So any donations you might make, or you will make, or you would make, are tax deductible. And I'm going to put a link in the chat. And so just wanted to see if anyone is looking at their end of year finances and wanted to make a little or some donation before the end of the year. We would greatly appreciate it. Some of the projects that your money may go toward, besides the running of the organization, we have 2 scholarships. One, we have the Claris Engage 2022 scholarship, which will help fund 1 or more women who have never attended Engage before to engage our hopeful in-person Engage session next July, which they're still planning on for Nashville. And the other is the Shin Memorial Scholarship in honor of Shin, and I don't remember how to pronounce her last name right now, but for any of you who knew her, she passed away actually a year ago almost, and that will help a woman from the Asia Pacific North Asia, as they say, area to attend Engage, who has never attended before. Can we set up a matching donation? That would be fabulous. Thank you. So matching as in, if anyone is interested in matching other donations. That sounds good to me. I'm not on that committee, but I think we should work on that. So Daniel, will you? Thank you. Perfect. That's what I was just going to ask for. And I will be in touch. And if we do set that up, then I will follow up in an FMDiSC email to let people know. Thank you. I think that's it. Thanks so much.
Okay, Dina, how many of these scholarships have been given out?
So we've been doing this for a number of years. And again, I'm not on those committees, so I don't have the numbers, but I know that they've sent at least one person, depending on the money received, right? So they have sent more than one, if memory serves, per year. So if there's the money, they will send as many as they can afford. And boy, it's been several years. So
yeah. Hey, Dina, this is Beverly.
Hey.
I kind of track that too, because they're they get a free membership as well in our organization. And I think there's 17 or 18 over the last 4 years, 4 or 5 years. So, like I say, 2 or 3, up to 4 last year is what we had. And the year before we had 4 able to attend. So
It's great. Yeah, and if I didn't mention, for the North Asia APAC area, if a woman there is not really capable of or as brave enough as they said to travel all the way to the US, they might be able to attend the Japan engaged there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dina.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any announcements? Not at this time. Okay. We're gonna go to breakout rooms. Hopefully you'll have nice conversations there. And we'll be there for about 20 minutes, I think. We have to get Julio here and set up. He's supposed to arrive at 11. So we'll invite you back when we're ready to go with our next presentation. Bathroom is down the hall. And have fun in the breakout rooms.
Looks like I didn't get a breakout room.
Okay, let me find you. I just assigned a couple people.
I think Dan Weiss didn't either, he says.
No, I got him. You should be able to join room 5. Did you not get an invite?
All right, I'm good.
Good, excellent. Hey, Steve. No.
Different format, maybe even if the maybe content may be similar to what you might have seen from demo-wise. In case you have attended the November 16th session of Claris Engage Beyond, where Robert Holsey shows something about what we're working on. I think the different venue and format allows for other form of interaction that we believe it's valuable. So this is experiment number 2. We don't have certainty that this will last, although we have very positive early indicators that this is being well received. But so just to give you a little bit of context, and my presentation really doesn't go any further than this. I'd rather go and spend some time in kind of clicking around and showing what I wanted to show, which is a demo of the data collection app that we're working on as part of the quote unquote new stuff, as it's been called by Peter during the Engage Beyond keynote in late August. And I really will jump in there. Again, if you have attended either FMDiSC 10 days ago or a November 16 session by Robert, you will probably be familiar with a good part of what I'm going to show you. But again, I hope that this could be a different way and an opportunity for anybody here to engage with questions and conversation. I have one more disclaimer, and this one is a proper one. I'm not going to read through the slide, but basically I'm going to show a demo of stuff we're working on, which of course may or may not be released in future. And this is a sole discretion of Claris. That's as far as I'm going to go with slides. And then now I'll go outside of the presentation mode on Keynote and move to my browser. Okay, so what you're about to see is what we've been doing as far as it concerns standing up applications that are natively deployed to be consumed on the web with a visual development environment that is hosted within a browser, and that right now it focuses on creating data collection apps. So I don't want to give you too much context, but I'd like to have the conversation and questions as unbiased or as possible. So I'll just walk you over what's it possible to do now, and then we'll take it from there. So this is an app that is been just barely initialized. As you can see, the demo is FMDiSC demo is the name of the app that I created. You can tell we're running on a build that was released on our testing environment roughly 3 days ago. So there are already some differences from what we've been showing 10 days ago at FMDiSC, from especially UI-wise. So I'll start by clicking on Add Workflow. The notion of workflow right now is something that allows you to map the steps that a user should take throughout a variety of views of your app during an interaction that you're defining. And right now, such interaction is, again, predominantly focused on data collection. So when you click on Add Workflow, you get some sort of boilerplate or skeleton that you can start off of that is designed around a registration form. It's kind of the most simplistic form that someone can think of. And I'm now going to zoom into one of the two screens so you can see a little bit more what we've been doing in terms of allowing developers and users to build the app starting from the UI, the front end, and not starting from outlining and defining the schema and the data model first, and then work a UI on top of it. As you see, we have a variety of elements on the screen already. These are some fields that were part of the initial templates and scaffolding that it was automatically created when I click on Add Workflows. And those items can be moved around on the screen. And this already can give you a sense of some concept, like an underlying grid system, the possibility and the ability to reorder the items on the UI automatically. And for each one of this item, you'll have opportunities to adjust settings or eventually, let's say, validation or some sort of rules that we'll see as we move forward. You can get a sense of how the interaction might look like in the development environment. And now I'm going to add a few additional items. Those two that you're seeing here are short text type of field. I'm going to add a long one, and let's say I'm going to want to create a new row underneath here. And similarly, you will going to have similar settings. Now, text doesn't share, don't have two, basically, sorry, settings of text fields are fairly similar to each other. But let's say we have something like a drop-down field where you can start adding options. So let's say this is going to be like favorite color. Okay, looks like we have a network issue, and this is pretty standard operating procedure for demos, for live demos. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fun. And say favorite color here. Okay, that piece is not reacting. Totally normal for a live demo. But the point I want to make is depending on the element, you will have tools that allows you to define how that element is supposed to work. So a drop down might have option number 1. It says going to be color red or color green, and so on and so forth. The UI is giving from already. Okay, I'll try to hit refresh. I might regret this, but it looks like connecting in place is giving me a hard time. Okay, no. Besides the most kind of a simplistic type of fields, there are something that come with built-in behavior, like oftentimes you might be dealing with common data formats like a phone or email, and the advantage of having those fields already formatted as they are is that they come with embedded ability to perform things such as validation or formatting the actual value that is going to be inputted into that element automatically. Besides elements, and I'm going to drop us some more so we can see how those behave in a second. And this is a date field. There is also other that are not designed to actually receive input, but can be just standard plain text, for maybe we can be edited or outlined here. This is my demo form or FMDiSC, it's an example. Same for header or things like images. So I'm gonna have the image here. Those automatically adjust to preserve the proportion of the preview, and I can upload something from, let's say, my desktop, and yeah, you have a picture uploaded from there. What you can do as you're building, you can publish and see how this perform on preview, and what I'm gonna do, which is gonna do now. So this is it's an opportunity to actually see how the form behaves, and I want to show that some of the things that people would expect to happen normally in a web app hosted in browsers. That is, it is responsive, so it readjusts the fields based on the size of the screen, and the responsiveness is not just horizontally, but let's say if the long text here goes too long, also the height of the page is automatically adjust accordingly. So I'm going to add some text here. I'm going to show you, let's say, that the email field, if I just type Juliano and try to skip to another field, it will ask me to enter a valid email address, which I'm going to do in a second. Drop down, I'm going to select the value. Date will give me a date picker, and same for numbers. So I'll say 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 1, 1. As you see, that's be automatically formatted and still need is not valid. Okay, let me be closer. Oops. Okay. Validation goes a long way on phone format, and then I can hit submit. The second page you're seeing, it was the one that was outlined again in the work. It's supposed to be a 2-step process. So upon submission of the form, you go to the next page. More steps could be potentially added in between. And as we do submission of data during our development process, the data can also be viewed as this being collected and currently stored from the service in the cloud. I don't want to go too far. I can come back at any point in time during the next 35 minutes or so. So let me pause here and start see what are the reaction. I can pull up and down this browser window at any time, but what I want to provide to you is the opportunity to take note of my email address. I see that there are roughly 50 people in this audience today, and not everyone might have the opportunity to talk, or maybe some ideas can come after the session is completed. So if that is the case, anybody is super welcome to reach out by email if you want to have a more structured and follow-up conversation. So I'll stop here and happy to take any question or reaction, not necessarily.
We have a question in the chat from Daniel Weiss asking about, he's building a low code app, starting with a CRM with simple invoicing.
Sorry. Let me just.
Yeah.
I'm gonna unmute for a sec here. No, what I mean is, we look at lots of low code apps all the time to try to see how do they compare to FileMaker. And the first thing I do when I'm chatting with their sales team is, try to take the reins from them, first of all, because usually they don't want to let me even take the reins. They want to go through their demo. But let's say they do, or it's a demo that is self-run. The very first thing I try to do is create a simple CRM, right, with related data. So it's awesome that you guys have this starting point. I guess my question is, when are we, when do you think we're going to see something where we can create related data, i.e. a notes portal or a related invoice, something like that?
Okay, thanks for the question. So it's hard to communicate any form of timeline there. That this is, again, as you well said, this is a starting point. We're trying to get to a place where we can have something stood up and running, and it's delivered just enough value to be open to our customers and developers. That is number one, and that would allow us to expand and build on top of that way more quickly, hopefully, than our historical life cycle, just because of the nature of the product. So what you're saying and sharing is absolutely in our roadmap and our radar. We know that those are fundamental requirements. How those are going to be exactly implemented, then I don't have anything to share at this stage. But I don't want anybody to take away that we're building a form builder for you. The form is the most specific and vertical use case that we thought it might be meaningful to start from, to then expand and go way beyond that, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Dave Knight has a question or comment.
Yeah, I was just, I made a comment there to Juliana that I like, at least in your demo, you're not sitting here thinking about tables and fields and relationships and forms and so forth. You're kind of building that view right there, if nothing else, helps establish this is what the user is going to experience, right? We're building this from the very beginning with sort of a user experience in mind. And I like the fact, I mean, for the new, problem solver, subject matter expert, knowledge worker, citizen developer that Claris is always going after, this is it forces them to think in a simplistic manner or in a journey of what we're going to start with and where we end with. I think that's actually a really healthy approach to take to, I think it's friendly for new users, and I think it helps get people thinking about building for the user from the very beginning.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, David. One items I would like to add, and this ties me back to the presentation that Robert has made. Right now, the tool, the way it's presented, doesn't show any ability to either add advanced settings or expand or customize the logic, the business logic of the application or anything like that, which of course we're accounting for. Robert had a very good slide in that presentation, November 6th, that showed how we're thinking about a product in a way that if you're a user that requires just what you're seeing right now, you have it, but it will provide access to more experienced user to dive deeper into what is being built at a lower level of abstraction, if you want.
I'm just curious, Giuliano, are you ready for this yet? And the reason why I'm going to ask this question is one of the hardest things to convey to new users, and in my estimation, one of the poorest implementations in the current product that's been in place for years, is establishing a related data table and using table occurrences and the graph, which is cumbersome and hard for new users to get their head around. Are you guys prepared, or do you have anything ready yet to show how somebody would construct a join to a separate table?
Nothing shared, but it's stuff that is currently being explored, and we different approaches that we can take to that. We know that it's foundation. A good example that, again, was made at that session November 16 by Peter this time is that I think you made an example, you can build something to run a school, like where you have teachers and classes and students and tests and grades, and all this data is interrelated to each other, obviously, but nothing that I have to share either visually or verbally right now on this meeting.
Okay, Jerry Salem has a couple of questions.
Yep.
Oh, you wanted me to say them? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see, what was it? Oh, a registration form to me sort of is for people outside of the plant or my footprint. So that opens up licensing questions. Do you have anything to comment about licensing for this, or this is just a demo? Don't go there yet.
It's a great question, and probably I skipped that clarification. So one of the specific problem we want to start solving with this is standing up a web form on public web that can collect data from anonymous guest users. So that's the scenario we're looking at now. How the actual licensing is defined, that I have nothing shareable in that regard, but it will be necessarily designed to accommodate that use case where in many cases it's hard to estimate how many people are going to use that for, how many access you're going to have, or whether or not you might have peaks of traffic for a week and then nobody for the rest of the year, right? Those are all possibility when you have something exposed out there on public internet. So long story short, it's definitely a use case we're looking at, but I have nothing shareable about the actual nature of the licensing that will be supporting that.
Fair enough. Second question sort of piggybacks on David's question. I assume we will eventually have more control over the look and the feel. I want more purple on that screen. I will always want this to be in that corner. I want my logo on the top. That's all on your radar, right?
It is absolutely. Right now that it's early to show anything in that direction, but obviously we want to expect people to just deal with whatever are the pre-made building blocks as they are. That's big when it becomes interesting and tricky, is striking the right balance between ability and depth of customization, and how much of that should be done through clickable UI with like an inspector sort of approach. Like, let's say something like this could be way more complicated and instrumented to change not just the placeholder text and the title and whether or not this should be a required field for the form, but can have way more in terms of look and feel. And it's interesting because what Georgia just shared could be potentially addressed in so many different ways depending on the type of person that is in front of a tool. And it could go and be, again, as easy as having a color picker in here for a specific attribute or aspect of that UI element, as far as providing you a way to inject a CSS, a style sheet that overrides classes. And so you have absolute power on the final outcome. And those are all decisions that are being made, but it becomes very tricky to balance and decide what to prioritize above other, while try to keep a cohesive and consistent user experience that doesn't seem too confusing. But again, it's always just a long-winded way of saying, yes, we know that that's needed. We're gonna do it. And I'm sorry, that's probably it's my Italianism comes out with saying a lot of words, but could have been explained in one sentence. I'm working on it, I promise. But
I just want to make sure it's on your radar.
I like to explain what's behind it. Okay.
Okay, Robert Nod, I see your hand. Just a moment. I want to ask Tim Simbura, have your questions been answered?
No, well, not the one about the web hosting. So given that this is an app, is this something that you would provide, for example, the code that you would install on a Linux server, or is this required that it be hosted on whatever servers Claris is providing?
Another great question. I can tell you what it is right now. which doesn't mean it's necessarily what it's going to be for good, not at all. Right now, this is a cloud-hosted web application that is powered by the backend that we stood up. So we're looking at option at seeing how much this could be portable and maybe run autonomously. But that's something that we need to understand when and if and how that can be actually implemented that way. But so as of now, which is the only thing I would like you to focus on, because again, on the future development of this, there are a lot of question marks at the stage, which is also the reason why I think it's great for me to have this conversation, because I can source the initial reaction and where the mind of each one of you goes when they see something like this. Like it goes range from the customization question that we had before to this one about where this is being hosted, what is the actual artifact supporting this, whether this is executable code that I can bring somewhere else, or it's maybe just a machine readable descriptor of an app that is interpreted by something that we will never be able to touch. Those are all reasonable question and doubts to have as developers. But again, long story short, or is the key takeaway is that right now this is cloud hosted and powered by the platform itself.
Sure.
And for all these topics, let me pull that up again. Some of you already have my email address, but please take note, maybe shoot me something. I'll try to be as responsive as possible with anybody who might have follow-up questions.
Okay, we have a question from Robert Nod. If you would unmute yourself.
Yes. Is this all right? You can hear
Great.
me? So, Juliano, thank you for first some comments. I do like what we are seeing, what we are being shown. I think when Robert Halsey presented in Engage Beyond, there was an analogy with a skateboard and a bicycle and a car. Mm-hmm. And personally, I think the analogy I'm using is a sidecar, because I see this as complementing FileMaker. And I think there's, in the original communication, there were misinterpretation from the receiving end that this initiative was something to replace FileMaker altogether. And we know from the feature sets that we're clearly not there. So I'm glad for all those things. And in here, I do see that there can be a future where it's not going to be only for data gathering, but it could output information for someone who would have a session and things like that. I'm just a bit curious if there are things that you can share on the broader vision for things that we are dealing with in our development patterns. Okay, so if I'm thinking of a version of this that is in development where I'm crafting a workflow, okay, and I need to see that new workflow I did replace an existing workflow in production, would I have to then like replicate my changes by hand, or would I have to something that would migrate the changes, or would I have perhaps the two workflow on the same environment, but I would swap the endpoints when I'm ready to quote unquote go live with my new thing. So there's a lot of things that can happen, and I'm sure like on day one, I don't think we can expect that there's going to be a lot of things that cater to that specific need. But in terms of broader vision, I'm just a bit curious of how these things will be part of the roadmap or not, or if really the intent is focused on other type of users who would not even have distinctions in between dev and production. Everything would happen in prod, and that's it. Every change would be live the very second you apply it, and things like that.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. Number one, let me pull up quickly. I know what slide you were referring to very early. This is a popular slide for, I guess, I think Spotify is the first company. I associate this slide to Spotify. Spotify definitely had material in this regard. And the whole principle is that if you know you're trying to build a car, you don't actually build the cars from scratch. You start from solving the problem that a car solved at a much smaller scale, which is moving from A to B. And the ideal starting point is a skateboard. So that was kind of the reference that you were making. I just bringing it up in case other people attending the meeting right now I haven't seen that. I like when you say that a sidecar, which I can relate to that concept, but I would negotiate on side skateboard at this point, if you agree with that. Okay. I see a thumbs up, so we're good. So now that we agree that it's a side skateboard and not a sidecar, the rest of the question you had, it comes with a lot of implication and assumption of how you're managing the software development lifecycle. Like just the fact that you told me about swapping endpoints, it gives me visibility on the fact that you have a notion of multiple environments. Let's say you're going to have staging, a QA, a pre-prod, and a production environment. And in order to make that transition seamless, as today is basically standard practice for most popular services with large user base, they don't have downtime at all. They roll out that incrementally, and part of the practice and solution today is what you just mentioned. Now, this is very specific about the how. I think the important thing for us at the stage is being aware of that type of problem, but most importantly, when that problems manifest themselves, right? There could be scenarios where a form could be just, let's say you don't have really multiple version out there, or just one published version, and you don't even have a staging environment for that. You just publish a change, and that's change overnight, and then you only need to deal with the scenario where maybe someone is going through filling the form in the exact same moment where you publish a new version and what you want to do about it. And then it gets way more complicated to more complex versions, whether it's updating a whole app or just a part of that. And I'm unfortunately, I know this is probably not what you would like to hear, but I have absolutely no idea how we're going to execute on it. Because I think the moving piece part that you just mentioned goes, it's very broad, and it's really depending on the type of app you're running, how mission critical that is, what type of audience is serving, if it's global or not, or it's divided by geo. So there are so many variables on which right now for us, I don't want to say that it wouldn't be worthwhile spending time thinking of it, but I think the risk of coming up with any assumption that we crash into a wall at the moment that we actually try to execute, given that it's so early, there is I think the juice wouldn't worth the squeeze right now for the type of problems that you mentioned. Not yet.
I totally understand. You're basically, if I rephrase, we're not there in the life cycle of the product, so that's good. And I think from what I hear coming from you, it sounds like you're aware of those things, and in the broader vision, we can think that it'll have to be addressed sometime. So thank you very much for your answer.
Sure. And you summarized that much better than I was able to do, but I think everyone in this room already acknowledged my problem in being succinct. So, but if you may be my supporter translator, I think it would be awesome. Let me share another quick slide. It's kind of a pending slide, and I think this is some of the way we, and especially I like to think about product development. Is that we, as you've seen, that the type of questions that I'm receiving right now span a very broad spectrum of problem set that needs to be challenged and faced when building complex application for a decent, install base, decent sizable install base of users. And I think we might be much better start by trying to make sure that we solve at least one problem very well. They try to bake into this a lot of elements across the software development lifecycle that we were talking about, but they're not able to really crack it across any dimension. And I think this is I find this very helpful to iterate and then decide where do you want do we want to expand the product, in which direction, whether it's horizontally in terms of problem they can solve, or either vertically in terms of offering maybe the same solution, but with tools that allow a user with a different skill set to be as effective as another one.
Okay, thank you. Kevin Hanna has a question. Kevin, you want to unmute yourself?
Sure, Lynn. I apologize. You know, context is always most important, and I may have the wrong context here, but Juliana, can you tell me, I mean, this, as I understand now, this is a web app. This is not native functionality to FileMaker. I was just curious, as I've always been interested in seeing us move towards having alias names for our field names, if that was a component of the future adaptation for this app.
Okay, that this could be very specific of a feature that I might not be, for a problem that I might not be fully familiar with. Can you add more color to that?
Well, if I had a field named name_last as an example, I don't want that field presented to the user in that manner. And as you did your demonstration, of course, which was very impressive, I'm thinking in my mind, this is native file functionality, but you're demonstrating a web app that can work in hand with FileMaker, if I understand correctly now.
Yes, I'd say that the answer to that question is yes. Two comments. Number one, yes, you're right. This is a web application. I might have glossed over that. I hope I didn't, but I might have. So I'm good at now that's clear. And in terms of operating with FileMaker, that's also absolutely a yes. One of the first things we're looking at is, as you've seen, I've showed you data that was hosted on the cloud, right? On this cloud hosted platform right now. But one of the first things we're looking at is how your existing or new FileMaker solution that have been built can tap into this data and actually use it alongside. So we're looking how those two things can obviously work together as one, and expand the possibilities and problems that you can solve with our toolset. Specifically, talking to your alias example, I don't know if that solved exactly the problem you're talking about, but yes, when I was showing you, I can drag a field, and I can do it again in a second. Let me share my screen again. I think you were talking a field like let's assume that I drag something like this, that right is presented with this email label. I have quote unquote power on adding a custom visualized name. There's a little bit of lag on the UI right now. Oops. Didn't hit return, sorry. Name. Okay, the UI is abandoning me again. It's normal.
Well, that's fine. Juliana, my question was just if you were to open up the server and we looked at the schema, is that first name field actually named first space name, or is there some kind of conversion process that's making it presentable to the user?
There is for sure that there is an abstraction layer in between that. This gives you the possibility to not having the problem to deal with that, especially what is being showed. So that is for sure. And I can show you that I think from here, and this is early and experimental, but these are kind of the tables that are being created underline. And as I create multiple versions, it creates different snapshots, but you can see that email field still presented as email in the actual table, but right now I'm editing that to look like something else. And there is no either side effect or impact on how that field looks like on the actual table on the storage layer. And you can customize what's being displayed to the user. I don't know if this was exactly what you were looking to solve. Maybe
Giuliano,
not.
I think one of the more common use cases is to the end. For us as developers, sometimes we're challenged with SQL. Using SQL legal things with underscores and no spaces, things of that nature. But probably the most common scenario, I think, is I want to give my user an export dialog, and they might want to pull fields from a list. And if we've got them named in a sort of schematically geeky fashion, it's hard for them to identify them. So we're looking for user-friendly interaction for the end user at times, and that can be on a layout mode, or when I'm trying to let somebody export an Excel spreadsheet of the current layout or something of that nature. So both of those two areas, the layout and the export dialog, we might want to have something that's very user friendly. And yet as a developer, we may want to organize things or really stick strictly to SQL, or like Kevin was indicating, name comma last name, or name underscore first, name underscore last, et cetera, so that your fields line up and are sortable within our schema and easy to locate.
I see. Okay. That is goes beyond what I just displayed. That makes perfect sense. Okay, it's good. It's another point. It's interesting to hear and take. But those are the type of conversation where obviously we can solve right now in here. But where if you have anybody here has material or actual real world scenario problem they bumped into, and how they, so that we can think about the best way to implement a solution for that, and then we'll see how high it will fall into the overall priorities that we have to juggle with. That's super helpful for us.
Juliana, you haven't said much, if anything, about how this connects to the backend FileMaker database or whatever backend we're going to use. I mean, we can create first name and last name on the web authoring, but how does that connect to the fields in the schema?
Right now, you'll be able to, we're looking at the first step as using that as an additional data source in a similar fashion that you do with ESS, basically.
Okay.
And it's actually, some of the things are in flight right now. So I don't have too many details that I can share, but that's kind of the approach that's being taken.
Okay. Tim Owen has a question for you.
Yep.
Yeah, the question was, I'm interested if this is anticipated to at least to some extent replace custom web publishing, sort of in the same way that WebDirect replaced instant web publishing. It's would be a particular use to me because I specialize in solutions for film festivals, and typically these are essentially work group, local area network work group databases that have some need once a year for data collection from filmmakers that need to confirm details of their film, or data collection from volunteer screeners that need to log in and put in a review of a film that's under consideration. Frankly, the changes in Claris FileMaker's licensing over the last 5 years is killing me, because it's no longer viable for me to incorporate that feature, except for those smaller clients that for whom a site license is viable with it's 100 connections and 25 user connections. So is that on Claris's radar to enable to replace custom web publishing to any extent, at least for the purpose of data collection from anonymous users or those that aren't licensed FileMaker users?
I would say yes. The one of the issue when you want to when you need to solve the problem of data collection from external users is and that person specifically is not in your org, so it's an anonymous guest user. Let's say WebDirect has the challenges that might not be able to scale to the extent you need, and the look and feel in the what's being rendered is not modern. The reason for that is that WebD was designed to replicate the feel of accessing a FileMaker solution through the desktop, but on the web, right? So that we're looking at right now at having something that follows, DOM HTML layouts conventions as it's supposed to, which WebD wasn't simply is not doing. Custom web publishing was another way to create touch points on the web. So I would say that the amount of overlap there it's very high, and I think that the way we see this growing will definitely end up replace the space that those tools occupies, at least. Not necessarily replace on a feature parity perspective, right? There could be, I'm expecting differences for sure, but the whole point is helping you and your developers to nail that problem, regardless of how the other tools might come into play or not.
Okay.
So the answer is yes, basically, at least from the limited standpoint of allowing that sort of anonymous data collection on an occasional basis, which is not part of the main purpose of a solution, and have that incorporated somehow in Claris's licensing scheme, so it's not as onerous as it currently is under Claris FileMaker licensing.
Right. The only asterisk to my answer or footnote, if you want, is that by not having full visibility and understanding of how your solution are implemented, I cannot guarantee, yes, you're going to be able to replace what you're using right now with what we're trying to build. But the problem we're looking at is absolutely the same, and the surrounding elements of that needs to be able to allow you to do that easily, and licensing is definitely a piece part of that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have a question. Are you anticipating that you'll be able to connect different workflows to the same FileMaker database if you're collecting, information from presenters at a conference different from attendees at a conference? Is that going to be possible, you think?
When you say workflows, are you referring to the actual
the interface
sequence of screens that we were showing?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And again, this goes down to the most foundational problem that you need to face when you build an application, whether you build it with a platform that accelerates that, so provides you some pre-built tools to solve that, or you're building from scratch with code all by yourself. At the end of the day, it's a common problem that many apps that have, as soon as they have users with different roles, that therefore need to have access and visibility and permissions and rights to do different things. So that surely will be is accounted for. It's not visible at all right now. The assumption is there's just one type of user. Is unauthenticated. It's come from the web and just need to submit data into whatever form that you might have built. But the expansion will be that those people will have their own, could have their own identities on this future expanded app, and those identities might be tied to different roles, which eventually have different rights and permissions and things that they could do.
Great, thank you. Marty Pellicor has a question.
Yeah, so I take it, obviously, this is a web app that you can create this to collect items. Can it, or do you have any plans on making it so that it can work offline or not connected to the internet?
So we know that definitely a scenario that it's important in some circumstances or industries. Right now, we just focus on getting out of this one that obviously requires internet connection. But the same way FileMaker can support those scenarios, we have to understand how this can be important and supported there as well, and see to what extent it is executable. So the real answer is I don't know exactly, but we know it's important, and we need to find the reasonable trade-off to support it and see how that actual pain point can be solved with that, or if there's any other solution to that we can look at.
Robert Nod had another question. Robert?
Yes, thank you. Half a question and half a comment at the same time. Basically, the workflow concept, or I think is something we're all gonna need to familiarize better with, being able to identify what is a workflow, what is not a workflow, where it fits and where it does not fit. I know that what we're presented is very streamlined. Perhaps someday, again, in a different future, we can think of workflows that would branch, or workflows that would loop, or workflows that would trigger other workflows. But I just think today, what I suspect is that a lot of people will make direct comparison in between this new thing and WebDirect, where WebDirect is really not so much workflow driven, or the framework around it is like navigation can take you just about anywhere, and so on and so on. So I think as a community, we're going to need to be knowing more about what that can do and cannot do, because at some point in time, when we have a new tool, we like to do a bunch of new things with it that may not be quite expected, and sometimes we like taking something square and fit it in a round hole. So that's it.
All right. Yeah, no, great comment. I think it's the comment I would like to make is to try to separate the what from the how. I don't want anybody here to take away that this product will have a workflow builder 100% of, like, for sure, right? The point is that we know that oftentimes when you define an app, you think about, okay, what is going to be the user experience, right? So those users will go through a variety of flows based on what they're trying to solve. And one of the way to support someone to build an app with that mindset is obviously a legitimate option is a workflow builder. And if that is going to eventually be the solution, then of course you're going to see branching, loop, or go to, or other form of conditions or switches. I mean, which is basically just the same construct you have in programming when you define the logic of the app that reported in a workflow diagram. So that is a possibility. But when you say we want to start become familiar with the workflow builder and how that can be tied, my answer to that is it's good to, I think the reason why having this conversation is valuable, because you know what you can see some of the things we are experimenting with, but I don't want you to take this as fully baked decisions that we're gonna now go full steam ahead, and so that I can promise that 12 months from now you will have the strongest and most complex workflow engine that you could ever imagine. Because we can very well realize that for users with skill set that are not too much into programming, maybe that's not even it's barely needed, and it's very needed to those that are way more advanced. And for those people, maybe we can just provide a way to find custom way to define how those views should be linked to each other, maybe within the inspector of a clickable item that takes you from view A to view B. And again, I'm in assumption land right now. But the takeaway is that the workflow is a solution for a specific type of user to try to solve that problem. Whether or not it should be the main way to solve the problem within the product, we don't know yet. And what I want the takeaway to be here for the whole group here is that we're not trying to present something here so that we get consensus from the community and okay, we'll go ahead, or coming with already made decisions. To me, it's informative to see what question raises what it just showed, because it allows me to say to see how you're thinking about problems, which I mean, generally speaking. And the life cycle example you made earlier, it's another great one. So long-winded way of saying, I think I want to be aligned on the problem we're trying to solve, but not necessarily how, because that's very loosely held right now. It can change, obviously.
Can you?
Yeah. And
can you define the problem you're trying to solve for us? Because I'm thinking that's not. Is it?
Sure.
Web publishing, or what is it?
Right now, the short term that I think that is less likely to change, very low odds, is data collection, public web, anonymous guest users. We start from there, and then we'll see how this can be expanded, either horizontally or vertically.
And if I can just reframe what I mentioned in terms of feedback, it's just like I think we're going to need a fair bit of education to go through this mind shift, you know, and if I can make a comparison, it's a bit when FileMaker went from FileMaker 6 to FileMaker 7. There's a lot of things that changed, and we needed to get this new mind shift. And if there's a tool that I don't know what's the best fit for it, I'm going to leave it on the shelf, and I'm going to keep using the tool that I know how to use, what they're for, and doing those things. So that's all I just wanted to voice.
Right.
When I said familiarization, it was more like education and understanding where the fit is. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Lynn, I want to be mindful of the time, but really quick, I see a comment from Jerry that I'd like to address. He's saying that this is a group of experienced developer, and what I'm showing you doesn't doesn't solve anything for us. Because those are geared to easier use for the novice. I would say that's not. I don't fully agree. I mean, I agree with the overall statement that probably what you're seeing, you don't see as something, wow, my life has changed. Of course, I'm not expecting that. But I would like to reattach to my comment about, okay, customization of UI as an example could look very differently for a variety of users. And the novice user that you're mentioning in your comment, Jerry, is probably the type of person that will need, you know, a UI supported configurator. While someone like more advanced developer that maybe have good skills with CSS and JavaScript might have a way to hook in their own custom developed style sheet and override the solution. I think I don't want the early stage of the product to be conflated with the type of person we're solving the problem for. Again, this is a starting point, and we need to strike a balance of a tool that on one side provide access to non-super skilled user to solve problem, while becoming be an effective accelerator for those who are as experienced as you are.
I think one of the things that we as developers, I'm always sort of struck by how we as advanced developers assume that the platform was built for us. And, you know, custom functions and looping scripts and triggers, those are things that the vast majority of FileMaker developers don't use, right? The subject matter expert, that knowledge worker, that problem solver is always been FileMaker's sort of sweet spot. So when you look in the marketplace and you see how FileMaker has sort of lagged behind, there's a handful of areas. Number one, you go to the high end and you go to Salesforce and that level of application, which is very deep and polished and complex and expensive. And then you have the other side of the market where it's Smartsheet and Airtable and people like that who really want to just get quick data collection forms up onto the web and shareable without some of the deployment headaches that come with an installed piece of software. I think, you know, when Juliana showed that pyramid and showed that slice of the pyramid, we're not going to have full tilt CSS right out of the gate. Perhaps we're probably not going to have advanced charting. We're probably not going to have a lot of the features that we're used to having as experienced developers. So Claris has to kind of balance, wow, we've got this legacy application in contingent of developers and customers who have very rich expectations, and yet we're trying to build something that's going to compete in the marketplace, and we have to do that in that MVP model that starts to attract those new users, and then we fatten it up over time. I think what they're doing on the web is exactly what they've done with the product over the last 30 years. It started relatively simple, and it's going to get stronger and more powerful as time goes along. But I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is going to appeal to a different audience, even though there are some benefits that apply to every level of FileMaker developer.
Yeah, no, I see that, but again, I don't want what was shown today to be taken away as this is something that is not going to be helpful at all for experienced developers, because that wouldn't be true, right? It will be. We will need to find and build ways for the most experienced developer to get value out of this as well. Acknowledging that there could be new market opportunities out there for the low end of the spectrum in terms of complexity, but those are all the things that we're carefully evaluating and balancing.
Thank you, Giuliano, for your presence and your conversation and our introduction to something that's maybe down the pike, maybe not. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see how it develops.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for being here and presenting. You're welcome to stay around for the rest of the meeting. Right now, we have a couple of announcements. Jefferson Crane has a short announcement.
Thanks, Lynn. I recently retired from my position at the Los Angeles Unified School District, but I'm still working with the Arts and Archive collection. There are approximately 100,000 items in the collection, some known and many still to be located. About 10 years ago, one of the FMDiSC members developed a database for the archives in FileMaker 11. It's time for an upgrade, and I bought the office a license for FileMaker 19 this week. The office's needs are simple, and I really wonder if anyone would like to take on this important task for free. I'll put my email address in the chat, and then I'll also post on the group, whatever that is, the group IO.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Rosemary has an announcement.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to my kitchen. I'm down in my kitchen instead of my home office today because we just wrapped up an intense 3.5-day workshop with our new event planner, Janine and myself, getting ready and starting to plan Engage 2022 in Nashville. So I'm sure everyone's excited about that. And so my ask to you is, we're going to be coming out with the call for proposals first thing in January, so in the new year, and it's going to be a very short window. We're going to probably only have about 2 weeks where the call for proposals is open. So please spend the next month or 3 weeks over the holidays thinking about what you want to talk about so that you can hit the ground running when the proposal application goes up. And we are open to pretty much any kind of proposal. Obviously, the sort of traditional, what you think of as a historical DevCon session, we're looking for that. If you want to pair to do a presentation with someone who's done lots of presentations and you're mentoring someone who's never presented before, propose as a pair or propose, hey, I'm willing, raise your hand and say, I'm willing to do that. We're looking for panels, and we're looking for other creative ways for the community to connect and share knowledge in formal sessions and in more formal, more informal ways. So we'll have a lot more guidelines in the application, but just start thinking and feel free to be a little more creative than we've asked you to be in the past.
The application is found on the website?
Yeah, well, the link will get out. It'll probably be on the Engage website. It'll be all over our social media. It'll be in the community Engage topic. It'll probably be sent to partners. So yeah, we will do as broad a reach as we can to get the word out when it's up and live.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to turn to Bob Shockey. He's going to tell us his thoughts and processes that they've been experienced with in disaster recovery. Can help us with everything except zombies. Bob, I've made you co-host so you can share your screen, and let's talk about disaster.
All right. Thanks, Lynn. So this is something that we developed a couple of years ago, and I'm going to be delving into kind of as a case study more than advice necessarily. So please take that caveat with all of this. But I'm calling it Disaster Planning, a Case Study, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love AWS. And oh, there you go. So I'm not going to go into a lot of details about the company or myself, except for the things that I think are somewhat relevant to the scenario that I'm going to be talking about today. Alchemy Consulting Group has a 5-person in-house team and a handful of subcontractors helping us out right now. We usually have around 12 12 projects in development or in active support contract at any one time. And we have an actual brick and mortar office with on-prem servers. And that's my office. That's some of the rooms in our office, just to prove that we really do have an office. And so you can see it's a real place where real people come to work. And so we had to think about disaster planning from the standpoint of, what is the risk and what are the types of disasters and scenarios that we're going to be dealing with? What are the things that could happen? So first, let's talk about calculating risk. I saw risk described as consequences multiplied by likelihood. And I thought that was a pretty good way to describe it. I've always said, you have to think about how likely something is to happen and how bad it would be if it really happens. So, a low consequence and a low likelihood, that's considered a low risk. And at the other end of the spectrum, a high consequence and a high likelihood is considered high risk. I think the chances of a disaster are, I don't know. We're always waiting for the big one. We live in Southern California. So, we live in the ring of fire, right? And this could be, an earthquake happening in our area at any given time. And how bad will it be? How bad will it disrupt things? Our building could become, something could happen and the fire department could tell us, you can't come in anymore. You can't get to your server. You can't do anything. You can't grab it and take it somewhere else to do your work. In terms of how bad it can get, FEMA, being FEMA, doesn't give an exact number. People always choose the high one for infographics, the 60%, but 40 to 60% of small businesses never reopen after a disaster. Now, you have to ask, what kind of disaster are we talking about? What kind of business are we talking about, et cetera, before you really think about this. So I think when you hear that number, which you'll see that 60% parroted all over the place, you have to kind of think about where's it really coming from and how many different variables are there in assessing the amount of the likelihood that you'll be able to reopen your business after a disaster. FEMA also says that 90% of businesses fail if they can't reopen within 5 days. So businesses that can't reopen within 5 days, 90% of those never make it back. The presumption is that things are bad enough that they can't overcome the amount of rebuilding involved, or they've lost so much revenue that they don't have any way to open their doors and pay their employees to get back on their feet. And then another company called DataCore, which is a data storage type of company, says that 2% of businesses recover within the first hour. So challenge accepted. I don't think this plan that we put in place would work within an hour, but we came pretty close in our testing. So first of all, a little bit about the scope and the purpose of what we were trying to do here. We wanted some kind of protection from a natural or man-made event. And keep in mind that this was 2 years ago that we came up with this. So the threat landscape has changed somewhat, but we wanted protection of our dev projects on our on-prem servers if access to those servers is blocked. So typically, say a really strong earthquake, which is the most likely thing to happen in Southern California versus, say, tornado. Power often gets interrupted. Buildings often get disrupted in some way. We have databases that are under active development. We have in-house project management tools that we rely on pretty heavily. We have sales demos. All of these things are on our servers, our on-prem servers. And to lose access to those things means we're no longer in business. We're during that time, we're simply not working. We're not able to bill any time. We're losing money. And so that's an unacceptable scenario, especially if it lasts for more than a day. Then that starts to really put a dent in our revenue stream. Also, We have clients who have access to support systems. We have an issue reporting system that resides on these servers. We have test systems that they are actively testing out features, doing beta testing, etc. And they expect to have access to those things. So there's that too. So like I said, this plan was devised more than 2 years ago. And what that means is that the threat landscape is always changing. For example, ransomware. I'm betting that the majority of the people here today had the pants scared off of them by last month's presentation by Wim and Heidi and Chris. It was pretty scary talking about ransomware and how insidious it is and the things that can happen. This does not cover that. In fact, there are some things that are real vulnerabilities, like mounted shares are part of this. So you have to really segregate this policy from a more advanced policy, which by the way, is something that we are now working on because of last month's presentation. I just want to say real quick, Chris and Heidi and Wim did a huge solid for the entire FileMaker community, delving into things the way they did, presenting the information to all of us and getting this out there. I just want to thank them all for doing that, because I think we all should be paying very serious attention to the ransomware threat. And I thought their presentation was very comprehensive. So thank you to those three. We've also got an Active Directory domain controller in this picture, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that configuration is too. But there may be some vulnerabilities there too with the way we did things. Keep that in mind for later. So what are the scenarios? I love this little graphic where there's a tornado and giant hailstones and lightning all happening to this poor house at the same time. I hope that never happens to my house. So some of the things that could happen: earthquakes, fire can strike, any business. Even if it's not yours, it might be a business next door and somehow you're affected as well. Flood, that can happen not only from, say rain, but also a broken pipe somewhere can flood. If you've got a facility where you've got sprinkler systems for fire abatement, something can go wrong with those and they can flood you out. Power outage, like a long-term power outage. Of course, you never really know unless you have good tools with your provider how long a power outage is going to take to get repaired. A network outage. I actually consider the possibility as part of this of having 2 different feeds, one from 2 different providers, so we could switch over from one to the other. Turned out we didn't have a choice. We only really have one provider where we are, but that's another thing that can happen. Catastrophic server failure. Your server just decides to just destroy itself, to eat itself one day, and you can't get it back up and running in any reasonable amount of time. A cyber attack of limited effect. I'm specifically not talking about ransomware here, like I said, but it could be an attack that is like a DDoS attack or something like that. Something with a limited effect, a less destructive type of viral infection or something like that, getting into a server.
This is the view out the back window. And sorry, everyone, looks like I just lost my
earpiece. And it came back. How nice. Okay. AirPods, they're a whole new thing. This is the view out the back window of our office. These guys are right there. And sometimes these helicopters are fairly close to the fence right there. And that fence is about, probably about 18 feet from our conference room, and our server room's right there too. So, I'm not saying that anything's ever going to go wrong. These guys seem to know what they're doing. But yeah, they're right there. So included that too. We're right by an airport. That's just one corner of the airport that's closest to us. So the scenario is basically no physical access to our server, but we do have access to AWS, and we do have an instance, and you'll see how that's configured in a minute. And we do have access to internet connections and home computers. So we can go home and work if we need to, and we all have some kind of a reasonable internet connection wired into our homes. So we decided to plan this thing out. We had a series of meetings about it, and these are the things we came up with. We wanted to create redundancy, so a server in the cloud would be a good idea. We wanted to have really robust backups. We needed some kind of scripting to move the files around that wouldn't take all night. And we needed some kind of linkage with the cloud server and our local server involving Active Directory. We needed some kind of instance so that all of our logins would still work and be up to date, and we wouldn't have to create a bunch of individual accounts in order to get things up and running. We also needed a communication plan. We needed to know how we could get hold of one another. Well, you don't know what's going to be working, what's not going to be working in a disaster, but we identified that Slack, which we use heavily in our office, probably more for communication than anything else, mobile phones and email were all also options for communication. And we would rely on them in whatever order made sense in the moment. We decided that we could be pretty extemporaneous about that and not have a solid plan around that. We'd be okay. So once we figured out what the main components were, then it was time to execute those. And of course, when you actually start to implement a plan, some things in the plan change a little bit, and some things did for us. That's not anything to be dismayed by. I think it's just part of the process. So here's the configuration. Here's what we ended up with. We've got on the left side, we've got our on-prem servers. There's 4 of them. And we've got FileMaker server running on each one. And we've got Active Directory running on one of them and acting as a local domain controller for all of those. Then moving to the right, we're using Windows Scheduler to trigger off a script at different times, once for each server, giving each one time for the backup to be moved up to a mounted share. So basically, we've got our Amazon Web Services instance in the cloud, and there are 4 folders on that, and each one represents a landing place for the backed up databases to make their way onto that AWS instance. So the script, the scheduler fires off the script for server 1. The script says, okay, server 1, use robocopy to back up all of the appropriate files to these shared onto these shares, which are mounted shares. There's one of those vulnerabilities that I was talking about with the ransomware plan. And that managed share is actually a folder on the AWS instance. And then it tells server 2 to do the same thing, server 3, server 4. We're using robocopy because you can tell robocopy to only back up files that have been changed since the last backup. So that was a way to get around having to back up everything all the time, which is, a lot of bandwidth, a lot of potential time. Occasionally we're working on databases that have, very large data sets and are gonna, extend things beyond what we consider the acceptable amount of time. Another thing about this AWS server is that it's only spun up at night. Otherwise it's off. We have it on a schedule. It only spins up long enough for the backups to happen, for it to receive the backups, and then it shuts itself down. That saves us some money and makes this a little bit more practical solution. There's also an Active Directory instance on the AWS server, and for technical reasons that I actually can't go into, we ended up making that the domain controller rather than our local Active Directory instance the domain controller. It doesn't matter which one's which as far as sync, because they're going to sync in both directions whenever they get spun up. But it does make a difference from a security standpoint, because if someone were to get into that cloud instance and mess around with our Active Directory, a lot of mayhem could ensue. So that's something that we're probably going to change at some point. And I really honestly don't know what the technical reason was for doing it that way, but it was something that was suggested to us by an outside party that helped us with all of this. We hired outside expertise for our AWS and Active Directory setup, and we have a consultant who helps us with all of our AWS instances, and he helped us with this as well. Like I said, the AWS instance only spins up on a schedule at night. The FMS backups that we run are dedicated just to this operation. We mount those drives from AWS on the local servers, and they're just folders on the AWS instance. And we schedule tasks for each server to copy backups using Robocopy. And again, the only reason for using that is because those are changed. It can identify what the changed files are and back only those up. And we've got an Active Directory setup with AWS acting as a main controller. We rolled our own backup routine to AWS. That's simple scripting that we used for that. And so then it came time to do a real world test with this. And the real world test was, again, it took some planning. We had to notify our clients that we were going to take our server down in the days ahead. We wanted to try to replicate a real world situation as much as possible. So we notified our clients that we were going to have a shutdown on a Friday afternoon. We shut down that office server in the afternoon around 3 o'clock, I think it was, if I remember right. And everyone went home. Now, this is pre-COVID that we put all this together too. So at this time, everybody was pretty much working in the office all the time on a 40-hour work week, with the occasional person working from home for whatever reason. But for the most part, we were really all working in the office. So, you know, at the time, I think that felt somewhat, you know, a little bit of a new thing for us all to be at home working. I will say that when it came time to close the office permanently, or not permanently, but for a long period of time, for about a year, we felt a lot more comfortable with things, just knowing that we had done this, and knowing that we had this kind of redundancy if we needed it, and also knowing that we had built the infrastructure in our houses to be able to work from home. So everyone went home, and then in-house IT, who it just so happens the person who's designated with that job lives about 10 minutes away from the office. So, you know, he was in his seat and ready to work when everybody else got home. And we all communicated to him a list of needed systems. So in other words, instead of bringing everything back up on that one AWS server, which is really not possible, because we've got more than 125 files altogether across those 4 servers. Instead, we had to communicate to him, you know, here's the things that we need. He already knew, okay, we need, you know, all our basic in-house systems that are used on a day-to-day basis for project management. That stuff's a given. But we aren't all working on the same projects all at the same time. We've got things that are spun up that are, you know, we're waiting for feedback from the client. We know we're going to work on it, so we have it there. The client contacts us on a regular basis, so it's better to just leave it up and running on the server. But they're not active in the moment. So for things like that, it's best to just let those lie in the backups and not open them up on the server. Otherwise, he uploads everything into the right directory on the AWS server and opens them up, and the team logs in and resumes work. So we did that. We did all of that. We went through all of those steps. And we actually were back up and running within, I'd say about an hour and a half. And that probably had more to do with drive time than it had to do with anybody, you know, taking longer to get things done. The files, you know, got moved and got copied over into the right place and opened all in good time. And everything went about as smoothly as it could go. So the next step after that was simply do a postmortem. And so we all came back in on Monday, and we all took notes at the time, and we talked about how it went, and we all agreed that it went swimmingly. It went really, really well. Everything went according to how we thought it would go. But then we realized, okay, there's some things that aren't realistic about this test, and that's the follow-up part of it, right? We didn't actually do any work on those systems. By the time we were done, it was the end of the day on a Friday. We were all ready for the weekend. That's why we did it that way. That's usually a quiet time for us. And so it wasn't a real world scenario from that standpoint. There was nobody breathing down our necks, and there was no need to communicate with our clients at all. So beyond telling them that the servers are going to be down. So we've got this new temporary server address, for example, that we have to communicate to our clients. They know where to go to log into their systems otherwise and under a normal scenario, but they would have to be informed about how to log into those servers. And that included maybe a little bit of documentation, like what we first sent them when we first told them how to log into our servers, right? Which usually involves some screen captures, some notes, do it this way, do it that way, click here, click there. The files need to move back from that instance in the cloud where we've been working, whether we worked for a half a day, a week, it doesn't matter. We've made changes now, and so now those files need to come back down and get put back in their rightful homes when we're ready to resume work back in our office with our on-prem servers. The AWS server needs to return to a resting state. And of course, those backups that go back to that server, all of that needs to be resumed properly so that we're covered for the next disaster that comes along. Hopefully we're not getting the 1-2 punch of, say, an earthquake and then a flood or something like that, or 2 earthquakes in a row that shut us down twice. And then our clients have to be apprised of the resumption of activities, that we're all done. Things are back where they should be, and that they can go back to their old server address. But also they need to be informed about what happened. And I think this is an opportunity. No matter what happened, whether it was some kind of attack, cyber attack, or it was an earthquake or a fire or whatever, this is an opportunity to let our clients know, hey, this thing happened and we handled it and we were on top of it, and there was hardly any downtime for you or for us, and and here's our current status. So and I think that's true no matter what happens. I think even in a ransomware attack, which generally those are done through some kind of social engineering, and there might be a small level of embarrassment there somewhere. Somebody clicked something they shouldn't have, but even in that scenario, if you've got a good way to recover from that, I think that's something to blow your horn about. That's something to let your clients know, yeah, we were on top of it, we handled it, we had a plan in place. One thing that we did do actually was we sent out an email to all of our clients and said, hey, we just went through a whole disaster recovery plan. It worked really well. If you'd like to talk to us about it, if you'd like to learn more about it, you should have one too, and we'd be glad to fill you in. Didn't push it too hard. A lot of these clients already have IT, either on site or contracted, and don't want to cross over too much into their territory. But nevertheless, I think it was something worth sharing. So then the only other little bit I have to talk about real quick is the future. And like I said, this plan is already somewhat obsolete. Right now, we're working on a ransomware policy. It's based in part, like I said, on the presentation from Chris and Heidi and Wim. The risk analysis on that says it's very high in terms of impact. And we have to think about risk to our clients and their information as well. So we're going to incorporate some redundancy, firewalls, best practices, and more. And this is a topic perhaps for future presentation. I think this one's going to take a lot longer to implement, but the nice thing is we've already done it once. granted in a far simpler scenario than a ransomware scenario. I think it's far more complex and there's far more things to worry about with that. But still, this disaster recovery plan does at least have some of the components that we would need for a ransomware policy as well. And that is it. That's all I got.
Wonderful, Bob. Gosh, but it kind of emphasizes how the landscape moves. How does the recent AWS outage impact all this?
Well, yeah, one would hope. And again, you know, there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of crossing your fingers with any disaster recovery plan, right? You know, let's hope it's not a giant, all of the West Coast earthquake that takes down AWS's data centers as well as our own. You hope that the amount of redundancy that you have is enough, and you know, then you cross your fingers and pray too, because you never really know, right? I suppose you could add a third level of redundancy. I mean, you could, you know, have another offsite backup to a different kind of service that would, you know, further protect you.
Right.
And we've talked about that for some of our other data. You know, that's another thing about this disaster recovery plan is we understand that the nuts and bolts of our business is our FileMaker databases, and those are what we emphasized backing up. We don't have other kinds of backups of our data, you know, except for that we use some cloud services and we use things like Dropbox pretty heavily. So, you know, it's not all on our servers, it's elsewhere. But you know, there are other considerations that we did not include in this because we wanted to keep the scope small enough that we could implement something in a reasonable amount of time. You know, there's always a danger with a thing like this that's somewhat foreign and somewhat complex, and where there's a lot of things that could go wrong. You could end up spending all your time just planning and never really getting to implementation. We didn't want that.
Right. Dina has a question.
Dina.
Unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm on my other account here. Yeah, just going back to, sorry, I'd written it down. Just going back to the robocopy. I think that's what you called it.
Yeah.
Hold on a second.
Sorry about that, everybody.
Feedback.
Do we need a disaster plan for this, Dina?
I want to. I don't want the meeting twice because I was outside. I forgot to.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, my question was for robocopy. I've used AWS command line interface tool to do a copy of modified items only in certain circumstances. And I think I have also scheduled that. I'm wondering if you could use that instead, or is there something that robocopy accomplishes?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we're going to go to, actually. I don't remember if those command line tools were not yet released, or if we just didn't know about them, or if there was another reason why we went to robocopy. I'm really not sure. I wasn't in the trenches on the technical end of this. So I don't have and the person who did implement it is not here today. But that's one of the things we're looking at. For certain, we're looking at that in terms of our ransomware policy per, I think it was Wim's suggestion in the presentation last month.
Ralph had a comment.
Sorry, I wasn't actually expecting to speak, but I just wanted to, sorry to say that I've been using Mac Stadium actually for about 5 years, and even though that's for Mac Minis typically, but that's really worked out remarkably well. I just wanted to point it out as a reference source for anyone who might want to consider that.
Okay, great. Douglas had a question about a bigger network. Douglas, are you there? To unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry, guys. If you can hear me, it was just a simple little thing, and it's probably something that you had considered was in the case of like a network outage with, you said your IT person was very close to the office building, was that, you know, could they, if the office was down from a network perspective, you know, they might be affected as well. So just a consideration you probably already have is that that not relying on that one person to start up the new process on AWS, that perhaps other people should have the basic ability to get you up and running at least.
That's a good point. There's more than one person who could do this if we needed to. But yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, there's in the chat, Stephen Blackwell posted a risk analysis grid, if you want to view that. Stephen, do you have something to say about that?
Oh, it's the process that I've used for like 15 to 16 years to perform risk analysis, mostly for security audit purposes, but it's applicable to this situation as well. And I also posted a link to a story on CNBC today about the depth of the disruption caused by the AWS East 1 outage earlier this week, which to label it as fundamental is an understatement.
Yes, you're right. You are our eyes on the security world there. All right, but we all remember the internet was supposed to be designed to withstand a nuclear attack, but now AWS goes down and our coffee machines don't work. So Dave Knight had a comment.
Yeah, just to supplement a lot of what Bob's saying, we have used rsync pretty successfully, and it's pretty efficient, especially when if you have a window of time and you have large files that have to be pushed up to Amazon. It's another tool that you can automate that also is really efficient at block level comparisons and so forth. So you only move what's needed. The other point, I think I've made this before in other presentations, but I don't know if Bob is using this at all or not, but when you're doing your emergency or offsite backups, it's really smart to use what we call a zero retention backup. So that's where you set up an automated backup with FMS, and you say, I'm going to retain 0 copies of these. And what that does is it prevents FileMaker Server from renaming the folder each night with a date and timestamp, which when you're doing a comparison using rsync or robo copy or anything like that, it basically looks and says, hey, the folder name's changed and I got to move everything. So by doing a 0 retention, the folder structure stays identical, even though there may or may not be, whether it's the FileMaker files or remote containers in there may have changed. Now your command line tool can just sniff through and find anything that's changed without having to do a wholesale move of all of the data, again, just because it's sitting in a folder name that's changed. So.
Oh, that's cool.
Good point.
Okay, any other questions or comments for Bob? Okay, thank you all. Bob, that was a really slick presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, you're welcome.
And we will be hearing more from you in the future on your ransomware strategies.
Much longer journey, yes.
Yes, we'll look forward to that. Thank you from all of us. Thank you all for attending today and participating. Next month is, who's doing that? Is that you, Bob or Dave? Whose meeting is it?
That's my meeting next month.
Okay.
I'd be happy to hear if anybody has anything they'd like to talk about.
All right.
I have not nailed it down yet. And so please let me know if you'd like to present on something and what topic you'd like to present on.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for being here, and we'll look
Great
forward
job, Bob.
to next time. Okay.
All right.
Good day, all.
Great. Thanks,
Happy
everybody.
holidays, everybody. See ya.
Yes, happy holidays.
Yes, happy holidays.
Okay, here we go.